Hi, this is Yuzun Kang, and you're listening to the Chasing Dreams podcast with Aimee J.
Welcome to Chasing Dreams podcast with Aimee J. Aimee believes that realizing a life without regrets is achieved by taking chances, chasing your dreams, making moves, and overcoming your doubts. The Chasing Dreams podcast will help you overcome life's obstacles, believe in your potential, and inspire you to face your fears. And now here's the woman who is passionately pursuing her dreams, Aimee J.
Hey Dream Chasers, this is Aimee J. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. Every listen, download, subscribe, and share you do means so much to me. Now, as you know, and if you've listened to any of the previous episodes, I really enjoy getting my friends on the show. And I've already had today's guest's wife on the show. She was on back in episode 5. Her name was Anna Keela. And today I have Anne's husband, Yuzun Kang, on the show. And so Yuzun is a development manager and product owner at Riot Games. He lives in Los Angeles with his family, and today he's here to share his amazing dream chase story. And so without further ado, here's Yuzun. Hey Yuzun, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am wonderful in this cold climate we got going on the Northeast. How's it over in LA?
It's 73. I almost feel like I'm taunting you when I say that. It is actually 73. It's really beautiful out today.
Somebody should enjoy that kind of weather. I might have felt a pang just a little bit when you told me that, but somebody has to enjoy it, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful out. But the thing is, I spend most of my time indoors, so that gets kind of wasted on me.
That's true, but I'm sure you don't miss the snow of the Northeast, do you?
No, I mean, snow is just one of those things. Like, I think when you're growing up, it's just a wonderful thing. But when you're an adult and like you have to dig out your car and like go to work, it's just the worst.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, because that's exactly how most people feel, right? When you're a kid, it's like, oh, that's so awesome. With school delays, stay at home. When you're an adult, it's like, I got to figure out how to get to work.
Yeah, it's just a real drag. But that's part of it that I miss too. I mean, like I remember there was a snowstorm was it 2003 in Baltimore where it like snowed like crazy, and I just remember like walking down in Mount Vernon in Baltimore, and it was just me, like in the snowstorm.
The big one, right?
Yeah, the big one. And I was walking down Charles Street, which is like a main. So I'm talking like everybody knows Baltimore, but like there's a big street called Charles Street that goes from like the heart of the city all the way up to Johns Hopkins.
It's one of the main streets.
Yeah, and it was just completely deserted, and it was amazing because it was just me and a few stragglers just kind of wandering the streets and like grabbing a beer at the one bar that was open. Yeah, I mean, I do kind of miss that, sort of.
That's all right. This is a small moment. It'll be gone soon. We'll be back in spring.
Yeah.
And you guys will continue to have that beautiful weather.
Yeah. I mean, how are you coping with the weather right now? Is it pretty bad, or I mean,
it's cold, but yeah. You know what? Once you've been here, and you know what it's like. You've been here, and you're used to the cold. You kind of just go with it. There's nothing you can do about it. I mean, you just layer up and you face it. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny too. Like I just got acclimated to the weather, and so anytime it dips below 50 degrees, I'm freezing. Like I'm like, oh, it's so cold, or like rain. Like people freak out when it rains here, right? Like as soon as it starts raining, like traffic gets worse. Like people are like, "Oh my God, I gotta get home before the rain hits." And I haven't quite gotten to that state, but I think I'm getting pretty close. Like
really,
yeah.
Well, it's crazy. And speaking of when we were kids and on a snow day, you were probably playing video games, right? Your favorite video game of all time is Braid, which I've never heard of. What is Braid?
Oh, okay. So Braid is amazing. So. Have you ever played Super Mario?
Yes.
Okay, so if you've played Super Mario, you kind of know the types of like side-scrolling games where like you play this little character who like jumps on platforms and right, you try to get to the end of the level without like falling through a hole or getting hit by an enemy.
Yes.
So this game Braid came out, I think, right when we started law school. Actually, I think around like 2004, 2005. and it came out on Xbox Live. And it was this like small game like no one had really heard of. I mean, it had won some awards as a prototype a while back, and the game is basically a take on Super Mario by injecting time travel into it, and you have to use that time traveling mechanic and like solve these puzzles to get to the end of the game. And what made it so special was at the end of the game. So the whole game for me, like I think Jonathan Blow, the creator, would disagree with me, but the whole game for me was about this guy who had broken up with his girlfriend and was trying to get back together with her. Right? He's like chasing after her. So it was kind of like a nice take on like the main character chasing after the princess in peril trope in video games.
Yes.
And
a very common one.
Super common. I mean, Super Mario still does it to this day. And when you get to the last level, you arrive at her bedroom, and you can't enter her bedroom. And when you click the time travel button, so like it reverses time, you find out that it wasn't that you were chasing, like that you had to rescue her.
Wait, is this a spoiler alert? Should we spoiler alert this?
It is a spoiler alert, but if you haven't, the game's like 10 years old.
Okay, fair enough. I understand. Continue.
So spoiler alert, if you haven't played Braid, you should go play it, but spoiler alert, it turns out that it wasn't that she was being kidnapped and you had to rescue her. She was actually running away from you the entire time.
Oh.
And it was the first time that I experienced this moment where you had a game mechanic that was expressing a philosophical idea in a way that felt really powerful and emotional that only a game could express. And that really blew me away at the time. Like, really blew me away. And I remember just sitting there after finishing the game and thinking, like, how do I do that? That's interesting. Like, I want to do that, but I have no idea how to do that, right? And I had always played games before, but never to a degree where I felt like I had this inkling to want to go make games. Because to me, they were just pieces of entertainment, right, that you just engaged with and then forgot about.
Right.
And this was the first time in a long time where I had played it and it had such an impact on me that I wanted to go make a game.
Wow. So you'd say that this was kind of a significant moment in your life. Mm-hmm.
That was a moment, because I was being really irresponsible in law school. I had this loan taken out to pay for law school, and like I had partly taken some of that money, and subsequently I ate like ramen noodles for like 2 months. But like I'd taken some of that money to get an Xbox and a flat screen, like a tiny flat screen TV, or like a 23-inch. It was like very small.
But still a luxury that you normally wouldn't or shouldn't use your law school loan on.
Absolutely not. And,
okay.
and up to that point, like I hadn't really bought a console necessarily, right? Like in college, I was mainly just playing on my PC and playing games with people in the dorm. So this was a big deal for me. And I just thought it was going to be this thing where I just kind of like dick around and, play some games. But man, I played that game and I just fell so in love with it and so in love with the idea of making games that I just, that first year of law school, I played so much. I played so many games because I had to catch up on the backlog, right, of like games that I hadn't played.
Right, because Braid was just the beginning of probably what other games that did you discover that were similarly hit you?
So there's this game by a guy called Jason Rohrer. The game's called The Passage, and it was making huge waves at the time. I think around the same time, people were talking about how amazing this game is, like how it's a new form of game, and so you can download it for free actually. And the game is about just one character walking from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, and it goes on forever. And as you walk, you age, and then you eventually die.
Oh wow!
Which when you first played, you're like, okay, that's it. Like I get it. Like I got old and I died. But as you walk around, there are these obstacles, and you can actually go out of your way to pick up treasures. But if you go out of your way to pick up those treasures, you lose momentum. So you don't get as far as you want to the right side of the screen. So you have to make these choices. So like if you think about it, it's a nice metaphor for life, right?
I was just thinking that. Yes. Yeah.
You have these opportunities that you go after, but then you trade it for something else. So I was like, okay, well that's like a nice thought exercise. And what I didn't realize was when you start the game and you go up, there's a companion waiting for you, and that's your spouse. And when you run into your spouse, you start holding hands and you become a unit. But because you're a unit, you can't pursue certain opportunities because certain puzzles you can only access as one person, right? And so like there are certain opportunities that you can't access as a couple, right? But you're with this person this entire time, and sometimes you can access certain areas, and then eventually that person dies as you go. And it didn't hit me as hard as Braid, but I just remember actually kind of being moved by that idea that you can take an interactive experience like a game and actually communicate something about how we live our lives and what's important to us. And again, that was another thing where I was like, oh my God, like you can do that? I didn't know you could do that. And so that's another game that around that time that really like got me going.
And guys, we'll have links to these games so you can kind of see for yourself what they're about. But yeah, that seems very complex. I mean, I now when I look back at Super Mario, I'm like, wait, was there a deeper meaning to it? Like, I'm sure not all games are like that, but I never thought any game, to be honest, could get to that level.
Yeah, and I never thought of it that way either, you know? I mean, I was literally doing it just for entertainment, right? I mean, a lot of the games that I played in college were like first-person multiplayer games, right? Like Quake Arena, Half-Life, Half-Life 2, Counter-Strike, Age of Empires, stuff like that, right? Like you're just trying to have fun with your friends. And even with the Xbox, right, it was like Halo. Like you have these experiences that are more sort of geared towards entertainment. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I wasn't thinking about it in those terms until those guys came along and released these games that just absolutely blew my mind.
Wow.
And now that's a whole different movement in games, right? Like if you go to the Game Developers Conference every year in San Francisco, like, you know, you have the experimental game workshop where people present like experimental game mechanics that are supposed to explore like really deep questions in life. You know, one of my friends, Joel, him and his wife and a bunch of other guys created this game called That Dragon Cancer that deals with the loss of his son to brain cancer. So there are these games have come a really long way in terms of being able to like capture experiences in our lives and make them interactive and make them and allow you to experience those moments and experience those emotions in ways that other mediums can't, which is really exciting.
And so all of this goes to the creative nature that you've told me about, that you've felt in your life, that you've always kind of known you wanted to be creative in some way, shape, or form. Did that begin at an early age?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the earliest memory I have of wanting to make something was after I watched after I watched Neverending Story, the sequel. And
that was a good movie, though. I have to admit, I like that movie.
I haven't seen it since, but I still have memories of loving that movie, right? Because I watched it multiple times. And I remember after watching that movie, like I actually went and sat down on my computer, like this old 486, and opened up the word processor software and started like typing the sequel to the sequel. And I didn't get very far, but it was the first time where I felt like, oh, I wanna see if I can do this too, you know? That was the earliest memory I had. And I think even in school, in Korea, like when you're growing up, like anytime you do sort of art activities, they're geared more towards like a competition. So there's like a poetry competition, and I remember like participating in those and not being that interested, honestly, in like other areas in school. I mean, I was good at those areas only because, you know, like in Korea, like the way you're taught material is like you just memorize things. I was just really good at memorizing things.
Right. So you had it.
Yeah, and so like that stuff was easy, but not that interesting. And I remember one time, like I got nominated to join like the elementary school, like the math competition team, and I was definitely the worst member of that team.
Oh wow!
I was so bad. I think I was there for one session, and I just never went back.
They probably weren't too bad about that then.
Yeah, I think they're actually happy to see me go.
Yeah. It was one of those like, yeah, okay, I think for the betterment of both of us, I just won't come back.
yeah, I mean, you know, it was the same thing in college for me. Like I was pre-pharmacy and I just didn't. It's like organic chemistry, like to this day, it gives me nightmares. And
I think it gives everybody nightmares.
I just didn't get it. And, you know, that's why I like skipped all my science classes and just went to the English classes because that was more interesting to me.
So you have this love though. And how did you end up in law school? I say that because I'm your friend and I can say that, guys. Because you have this creative streak, and as someone who would always encourage someone to pursue their love or interest, you know, law school is not creative, usually.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So that's a really long story. I mean, I used to, and to this day, like, you know, I joke a lot about how awful law school was and how much I hated it, and how, like, the best thing about law school was that I met my wife, right? But when I look back at it now, it was actually a really great experience for me because, you know, it taught me how to think analytically and how to evaluate a problem and how to solve it, and to how to ask questions, right? Like how to ask questions in terms of like, why are we doing this? Like, why should we take this approach? And also being able to understand the other side's perspective. All those things, like, I think help me every day when I do my work. And I don't think I would be able to do that if I hadn't gone to law school, to be honest. So I definitely owe a lot to going to law school. I don't think I would be able to work in the industry without that, you know, without those skill sets.
So you don't think of it as a wasted experience. It just turned out differently for you.
Yeah. And I don't think any experience is wasted, right? Like, I think it all leads to something. And it just so happened that, it put me in the right place in the right time to join, like, the game industry. And so I feel very lucky. I think a lot of life just comes down to luck and circumstance and kind of being at that lucky crossroad. Yeah, so in terms of going to law school, I mean, so when I was in college, I was started off as a pre-pharmacy major, and I actually really hated it and actually wanted to go to film school. And because I was in in high school, I got really interested in films, and this is during the time when like VHS was still a thing, you know, like in the late 90s, and
when making movies wasn't as easy as it is today.
Oh no, it's so hard.
Yeah,
like nowadays it's so easy, right? Like anyone can do it, right?
From your phone, right?
Yeah, anyone, if they're motivated enough, they can do it. But back in those days, like it was pretty much impossible, or at least it felt that way. And because I lived in Indiana, right? Like, if you go to Hollywood Video, like you're not gonna find 8.5, right? Like you're not gonna find the great films that you should be watching. And so I was really hungry. I was like really enthusiastic, but just didn't know how to get there. And so even though I really wanted to go to film school, I ended up going to Purdue and joining the pre-pharmacy program on like a partial scholarship, I think at the time, and just really hating it. And I remember taking like the entry-level English courses and going to like the English classes, and just really just enjoying that a lot more, right? Like any other writing assignments, like I took a lot more effort into that. And the TA at the time, she was doing her MFA in poetry, and she told me, like after reading my stuff, that hey, like have you thought about doing creative writing? And based on her like recommendation and encouragement, like I changed majors. And
wow,
the way I changed majors too was really probably not the way you should do it, but I just felt like I couldn't make a good case to my parents on why I should do that, why I should make that change. And so I like intentionally flunked like a majority of my classes in pre-pharmacy my second year.
Y'all can't see, but my eyes are like growing wide as he's telling this. You flunked to switch? You couldn't just, I don't know, do it traditionally and go to the registrar?
Well, I could, but I just felt, I think growing up in a Korean household, right? Like you are expected to be a certain way and follow a certain career path. And that's coming from parents who I think are fairly liberal in terms of that standard. But I felt like for them as immigrants, they felt like, how are you going to make a living? Like if you can't make a living here, like how will you survive? And I think I took the chicken shit move and just didn't want to have that difficult conversation. And so just decided, hey, if I just force the issue, it'll just have to happen anyway. And using that really mature logic, I like there were so many. I mean, we could do a whole other hour on the fallout from that, like how bad it was. But
right.
It did allow me to switch, and that was a huge moment for me. And that's when I switched over. And when I look back at it now, like, you know, there were a lot of things that weren't at Purdue. Like, we didn't have a radio station, and I love music, and, you know, I wanted us to have a radio station. And I love film, but I had no one to talk film about, right? Like, I didn't know who the other people were on campus who were really into film. And so I just decided to form an independent film club, you know, and I just made a bunch of flyers and recruited a bunch of my friends and, like, blanketed the campus.
That's awesome.
And I really thought no one would show up. I actually thought like maybe like 5 people would show up and we'd like just shoot the shit and talk about the films that we love. And like 100 people showed up. I think actually maybe more than 100. And you know, I'm like 20. I'm like 19. I have no leadership skills. Like, you know, all these people showed up.
You have 100 people.
My only expectation was that people would show up. Just a few. We would like, you know, say hello to each other, and then we just talk about the movies we love, and we become friends. But like all these people showed up, and they were all looking at me to like lead them towards like some type of answer, and that really like, I was so not prepared, and I definitely didn't run the club as well as I could have. Mm-hmm. But that was the first moment when I was like, oh, like all you have to do is just try. Like, do you know what I mean? Like all you have to do is
right. You put up these flyers.
Yeah.
You had low expectations, and everything was blown out of the water.
Yeah, and that was a huge lesson for me, which was, oh, like I don't have to ask for anyone's permission. Like I can actually go do things and make things happen if I care about them enough, you know? And I actually met some really good friends through that club, you know, and learned a lot about films. Like I met people who were in grad school who were like way more knowledgeable about it than I was, and
right,
and just it was just like an incredible experience, but also like, but that was like my main takeaway, and it was the same thing with the radio station. Like,
did you start a radio station?
No, we tried,
it wouldn't surprise me at this point. I love it.
They each dorm at Purdue had their own radio station that, you know, guess what? No one listens to, right? Like who listens to their dorm room radio station, and in order to listen to it, you have to get this like special cable. Like no one's going to go out of their way.
No.
So it was basically just a hobby club. And at the time, like in my dorm, there was this one guy that was actually like reporting into CMJ, like the college radio like magazine, mm-hmm. And getting a bunch of free CDs and like reporting like our charts, even though like no one's listening. And he had gotten into his head that we should have our own radio station. So he like researched everything about how to get into the FCC and all that stuff, and we actually like hit the pavement at Purdue and like looked for sponsors. You know, like that's how far we got, and like it just never went through because obviously we couldn't convince people to put that much money into a college radio station.
And again, guys, this is in the years before Google was really, really big.
Oh yeah, so
for him to do research for this is big.
Oh yeah, so this is 1999, right? Like this is 2000, when like Napster had just come out, mm-hmm. and the idea of streaming was just like that wasn't even an idea in people's minds. Like the iPod hadn't even come out yet, right? So I feel so old saying this, but like that, the challenges were huge. Like, I remember with this one guy coming up to me and going, "What if I built a radio device that streamed your MP3s on your computer to a device in your pocket?" Like those are the conversation people were having. And so, yeah, it was, you know, I think nowadays we would have just been a streaming service right through Google and we'd have a radio station.
Right.
But back then, like we had to literally like learn how to code Linux and create a Linux server to stream our stuff into Winamp. Like that was such a challenge.
Man, you said Winamp. Wow. You remember when you can get the skins for Winamp? And it was for those who don't know Winamp, Winamp was the audio player before iTunes was big.
Yeah, for Windows, too.
Yes. Yuzun, what I love about these stories you're sharing is that you just did it. It wasn't existent. You really wanted it. And you were like, I'm just going to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, and that's a life lesson that I still kind of try to give to people that I mentor or manage or whatever, is you don't have to ask for permission, right? Like, you just have to go do it. The best way to convince people is just to go do it, you know? I think a lot of people try to waste time, so not try to waste time, but they just waste time by going through the quote-unquote channels, right? Like, I have to get permission to do this and this and this, or like, I have these obstacles. And I think a lot of that is mental, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of that is a mental blocker. And I think you just have to understand, especially in this day and age, like, anyone can do anything, you know?
The resources are out there, that's for sure.
Yeah. And now, whether you're going to be good at that is a whole different question.
Or successful.
Or successful, right? And how you define success too. But you can do it. Like, it's not that hard. Like, if you want something, you can figure it out and you can try it.
And so you're in law school. You've changed majors.
Yeah.
And now you graduate with a bachelor's in creative arts. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, I think it's a Bachelor of Arts. Yeah, I'm
probably?
pretty sure. And it was in creative writing and English at the time.
And so did you go right away into law school, or were you like trying something else?
No, so after I graduated, during my last year, I wasn't really sure what to do. Because what happened was, during my time in the creative writing department, I fell in love with poetry. And it was specifically after seeing this Asian American poet, Lee Young Lee, read. Mm-hmm. It had like a huge impact on me, because he was an Asian American immigrant, and his poetry was all about his experience as an immigrant. And all the poetry that I was reading at the time was like, you know, like romantic poetry, like British romantic poetry, or poetry from that era, or like poetry from the 40s and 50s, that sometimes like I just couldn't relate to, you know?
Right.
And so it was like this other thing that I just didn't get. And it wasn't until I met him and heard him read that I was like, oh my God, like, what I think about could potentially be art. What? Right? Like, that concept was so foreign to me that it empowered me to a degree where like I became like really obsessed with poetry. And at the time, Mariam Baruch, who's the head of the creative development department there, or so the creative writing department at Purdue, like really was kind to me and encouraged my writing and you know, gave me the confidence to feel like, hey, like I think I'm good, you know, like I think I'm good at this. And so she, at the end of my last year, recommended that I apply for a Master of Fine Arts in poetry. And she, you know, I was like, really? Like, do you think I could get in anywhere? And she was like, oh, you'll get in somewhere, you know? And so I applied to a bunch of places. And like most things in life, I put together that application at the very last minute. And
there's something about a deadline.
Yeah, it just does it for you. Like, I remember taking the GRE on like the last possible date I was able to take it. And I took, so I submitted everything, and I actually got into a few places. One of them being the University of Virginia, the creative writing program there. And that was being led by Charles Wright, who's just one of the most amazing American poets alive today. Rita Dove, an incredible poet, and Greg Orr as well, who I worshipped at the time. So they only allowed, I think they got like 800 applications that year, and they only allowed in 5 poets. So when I heard back that I got in, like it was like the biggest moment of validation, but also relief that I had a purpose in life after graduation. Like, I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to wander the earth knowing that I have this degree that no one wants to hire me for.
That's a legit stress that people have.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Like, what do you do afterwards, right? And so that was a huge relief for me. Like, I was like on cloud 9 at the time. I was like, oh my God, like, you know, and also, you know, I became like a cocky asshole a little bit. And, I was like, yeah, you know, I'm awesome. But you know, it was a moment where I was like, okay, I can do this. And subsequently after college, like I moved to Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia, and went to the program. And that was such a humbling moment because, you know, I thought I was hot shit, and I met the fiction writers and the poets, and they were so good. Do you know what I mean? Like,
you were
these
blown
people
away.
I was blown away by the talent in the room. Like, I was like, I had never felt so small in my life. Like, it was actually really depressing to be in that room.
So you
and
went
also
from cloud
exhilarating.
9 to cloud 2?
Cloud 0, you know? And so I was like, oh my God, like what's, you know, and you know, that was another great moment, like learning lesson for me, which is during those years that I was doing my MFA, I got so much better at my craft because I was surrounded by people who were really good, at all levels. The people that were in my class were really good. My teachers were they were one of the most respected poets in the world, right? And they were giving me feedback, right? And they were challenging me. And I got so good at that, at the time.
So you were learning from the best of the best.
Yeah, and I was being pushed. And I remember that being a thing in my head going, if I want to be good at something, I should probably surround myself with really talented people and hope someone rubs off on me.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, and I was like, if I can just be the dumbest guy in the room, I think I'll be okay. So during that time, after my MFA, I just wasn't sure what to do, and during my MFA, I also had gotten deported back to Korea.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, my family came when I was 14, and my dad was working in Indiana in a small town as a doctor to get his green card and then to be able to sponsor the whole family. But I had turned 21 during that time, so I aged out. So I'm going to take a swig of water. So I'd aged out, and so I didn't get the green card. And so when I didn't get the green card, I just didn't have a status. And so I had to actually leave the program and go back to Korea and then reapply for a visa. So I was actually out there in Korea for a bit and then came back. And I think my last year of my MFA, I wasn't so much creatively thinking so much as thinking about survival. I was like, how do I survive after this? If I don't have anything lined up after my MFA, I'll have to go back to Korea.
So you kind of went back in. So it's kind of like when you were graduating, you kind of got nervous and lost your mojo.
Yeah, totally. And became a total recluse and got really scared, I think, actually. And somebody, I can't remember who it was. Somebody told me, you should go to law school because that's a great way to get a steady job, And the
number of us that have heard that,
right? Remember, for us, when we went to law school, the fucking recession happened and just wiped out the market, right? But at the time, it seemed like a pretty good idea, And
you're not wrong. I think it was literally the second week we started, and everyone was like, "Sucks to be you guys."
Yeah, they were like, "This is it. Good times end now." And so I took the LSAT and all that stuff and applied, and didn't even give it much thought in terms of where I was applying. I literally applied to the University of Baltimore because I was watching The Wire. And I thought it would be cool to do criminal law, because why not?
I'm sorry, you're telling me that we have The Wire to thank for you coming into our lives?
Pretty much. That was again, I was not thinking very well during that time. And I also had a friend who was going there, and she seemed to like it.
That's the best thing I've ever heard, by the way.
And I didn't even look at rankings or anything. I was like, you know what? Baltimore seems like a pretty cool town. And I applied to the University of Baltimore and got in. And so I was like, case closed,
Based on The Wire. You said Baltimore was a pretty cool town based on The Wire.
Based on because I was like, criminal law, this could be cool. But one thing no one ever tells you is that you never make much money doing criminal law. So unless you're one of the big guys. So that's how I ended up in law school. And my first day of law school, going to the class, I was like, this is not for me. The immediate reaction of what do I do? And just thinking, okay, well, I can't just quit because then I'd have to go back to Korea. Okay, so let me try to think this one through. And it was during that time that I played Braid and went down that path.
So you go down this path and you figured out, okay, this is kind of what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy to get into the video gaming industry.
Nope.
So did you come out of law school with the focus of, I got to do this. This is all I'm going to focus on? Or did you just kind of, I got to live, I got to survive, and if gaming is it, then it'll be it?
Basically, yeah. After I played Braid, I was like, okay, I got to make a game plan, right? And I told myself, there are two things I love in life, right? I love writing, and I love games. And specifically, I love film and TV and games, right?
Okay.
So I told myself, if I can get into either one of those areas, I will be very lucky and very happy. So what do I do? So I started kind of looking around the area to see where I could intern or do anything like that. And I knew from just having played a lot of games during that time, like that Bethesda Softworks was in Maryland, near Rockville, and then there was also Firaxis in Baltimore County, right?
Yeah.
So and Big Huge Games was there at the time, working on Kingdoms of Amalur. So I was like, okay, so we have all these game companies here. So all right, let me look into like what jobs I could possibly work there. And I remember just going into the boards and being like really like their job sites, on their websites.
Yeah. And
being really disappointed because I was like, I can only do like legal related work, and all they're looking for are like production assistants and a lot of like more sort of mid to senior level type jobs. And I was like, well, I don't have any experience, so how am I supposed to get experience to work in this industry?
If no one will hire you to give you the experience?
Exactly.
The age-old question, folks.
Yep. And so during that time, I was watching a lot of movies, watching like every TV show and playing every game. So you can obviously tell from that I wasn't doing really well in law school, and because my focus was totally off. And when you play games, like all the websites, right, that talk about games.
Yeah, sure.
And so I was following a lot of like website like entertainment websites that deal with games like Rock Paper Shotgun and Kotaku and I think Joystick at the time. I don't know if they were still around at the time, but they may have been. And then also some like bloggers, right? There was a lot of like cool, like sort of academic game theory thinking, or sort of like interactive thinking, And so I was following a lot of those bloggers too, and trying to participate in those circles by trying to sound smart. And it occurred to me that I was like, you know what? A lot of these guys that work on these websites that are like kind of in the industry, they start off kind of working on these sites as like reporters or writers, writing reviews on games and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, why don't I just do that and see how far I can get and what I can get out of that? And so I called one of my friends from college, and we had done, his name's Brian, and he had done, at the time, like we got a group together in college to do a online magazine called Pulp Culture Mag, I think. And it was like a combination of like manga and like film reviews and like, interviews with like actors and directors and writers. So we had done like 2 issues of that together. And it was actually not a bad magazine, actually. We just couldn't make any money off of it, right? And people just couldn't agree on a vision for the magazine. So I had worked with them, and we were good friends. And so I called him up, and I was like, dude, you and I love games. Like, why don't we start this website? And the website was called No More Lives. And we just started a blog together. So, like, I got somebody to create the logo. We made, like, business cards. Like, I created the website and started, like, typing about, like, the games I love and like some like theory on game design theory and narrative theory. And through that, we got invited to like a local game development event in Baltimore County, and where people were showing off their indie games. So we went there to like cover the event, right? And during that event, I met a bunch of the people that I ended up being friends with till now. Like the girl that was running the event, Tina, she's over at Apple now, and we're friends. I met my future boss there. I met one of my good game developer friends there as well. And also met Sid Meier from a distance, which was really cool. So basically, I just started going out there to events, right, like East Coast events, and covering events and meeting people, and networking with people. And that's how I started kind of finagling my way into like the outskirts of the industry.
And is this website still around?
No, it's dead. It's very much dead. I think we gave it a
fulfilled
good,
its purpose.
It served its purpose. I think it was up there for about 1.5 to 2 years, and then we were just like, it was too much. We couldn't devote enough time to make it successful, and we couldn't devote enough time to like maintain it, so we shut it down. But yeah, so that's how I kind of networked to the outskirts of the industry. And when it was time for me to graduate law school, again, I was like, well, what do I do? Like, I'm not really sure what to do. And one of my future boss, like, he was working at Bethesda, and he had left the company to form his own video game startup.
Okay.
And he had read some of my stuff on No More Lives. So he had read some of that stuff and he liked it and felt like I could be like a designer and a producer in the future, and that I might be a good asset to the company that he's starting.
All because of your relationship with him and just networking and talking to him?
Yeah, just networking and talking to him. Like, at the time, he was starting this Baltimore networking event called Innovate Baltimore. So I was actually helping him out on that a lot too. And so we kind of started forming a relationship. But he also knew I was working on this website. And he had read all my stuff, and he thought like I could do it,
That's
just based
awesome.
on that. And I mean, I just sent him an email. I was just like, "Hey, what's going on, dude? Like, what's new in your hood?" And he was like, "Actually, I left Bethesda to start this video game startup. Do you have an interest?" And I was like, "Yes." And
The moment you've been waiting for.
Yeah, and so that was when I started in the game industry, in a startup, making really no money at all. I mean, during the 4 years that I was there, like I barely made any money. But I did it because I loved it.
Were you happy?
I think happy is a relative term. I think I was really stressed. I think towards the end of my run in the startup, I think it just weighs on you, right? When you're constantly battling for survival, because that's what a startup is, right? Like, you're constantly battling for survival. I think after a while, it just really wears you down, and it frustrates you too, right?
But your foot is in the door.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to, just to be clear, do you regret it?
Absolutely not. I mean, that was the best experience of my life, because before I joined, my only interest was in like maybe being like a creative producer or writer or an actual designer, somebody who does things, on a craft level. And joining the startup forced me to be someone else, which was the guy that vets the contracts, the guy that makes the deals, the guy that has to go find the money, the guy that has to network and form the relationships. And it made me, it forced me to stretch myself in areas that I wasn't comfortable in. And like taught me a ton about business,
right?
And how to run a startup. And it actually changed the way I thought about a lot of things. As an example, like I used to be a huge perfectionist before joining a startup. I would always for example, I was working on my second book of poetry for like 7 years because it wasn't perfect,
right?
And when I joined the startup and had to like just work really fast to survive, I realized the road to perfection isn't by being precious about your work. The road to perfection is by allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to show things at an early stage so you can get as much feedback as possible early on and adjust as fast and as quickly as possible at all times.
That's actually really great advice.
So that was huge for me because, again, I was a huge perfectionist. And I was also always really like kind of combative with feedback. And I realized like if I'm going to survive, like I better listen to people, and listen to their feedback. And it maybe like it also forced me to prioritize hardcore, right? Because I had to do like 45 things. So it made me prioritize like on a few things at a time so I could actually do things. But that totally changed the way I thought about everything, about creativity, about just how things are made. Like it just changed everything.
So, and not only did you get the experience, I mean, the magazine and the articles you were writing get you the foot in the door, gets you the initial job in the industry. And now here you are at Riot Games. You're doing so much more. And I mean, you love it.
It's awesome. I at Riot, we always have this thing about imposter syndrome. Everybody always feels like they haven't been found out yet, that they're a fraud, because it's just hard to believe sometimes the quality of the people around you and the quality of the work that you're being asked to do, and the magnitude of the game. Like League of Legends is just mind-blowing sometimes, right? How many people play that game all over the world, and so like you realize like you have an impact across the globe every day is like a daunting task, and sometimes you have to be doing your best impersonation of someone calm, and just get through the day sometimes. But other times it's just such an exciting experience. But actually, one thing I'd like to talk about is, when I listen to these podcasts, especially when I wasn't in the industry, people would always be like, and then I did this, and then I got there. And they never like tell anybody how they connected the dots. Do you know what I mean? Like, how did you actually get there, right? Like, what did you do?
Go for it.
And so, again, this may or may not be helpful, but it really, if I could give any advice to people, it's, life, I think, a lot of times is about luck and circumstance, right? Converging together to present you with an opportunity. That I think that happens to everybody, but in order to be in a position where you're in the circumstances where that luck could come to your door, or you could arrive at that luck, means you have to be prepared for that opportunity, right? You have to show up to work every day, be prepared, and do your best, and be very, very hard on yourself, right? And not sell yourself short, and work really hard, because nothing is worse than not being prepared when the opportunity comes and you have to let it go because you weren't prepared, right?
Can you say that again? That's solid gold right there.
Well, you have to work really hard to be prepared for the opportunities that come your way, because when they come and you're not prepared, that's the worst thing that can happen to you. You need, right? Like,
talk about regret. Yeah.
Like that's happened to me a couple times in life. And every time I look back, I'm like, I didn't work hard enough. I had no one to blame but myself. You have to be prepared. You have to work hard, and you have to be hard on yourself. Every time that I've done something that I felt embarrassed by, it's because I just looked at it and I went, whatever, like, that'll be okay, and then the result would come in and it would not be great. And I would always be so hard on myself. But, at the end of the day, that's a decision that I consciously made, right?
Right.
Like, that's a decision
you adopted
that I made.
it, you accepted it,
yeah,
you lived with it.
Yeah, and I consciously decided that I'm not going to deal with a certain issue because, it's just too hard, And so I think if you're working in entertainment, or you're trying to break into entertainment and you're making stuff, at the end of the day, the people who read your material, who play your game, who read your screenplay or whatever, or who use your vase or whatever it is that you do, they don't give a shit how hard it was for you, right? Like, they don't care that you were tired that day. They don't care that you didn't have enough resources that day. They don't care that, you guys were hungry and needed to get food. All they care about is whether that experience is good and worth their time, right? And if you have professional pride, like, you need to make sure that you're very vigilant and hard on yourself to hit everything to the max as much as possible.
So basically, give it all you got.
You have to. And it's hard. It's not easy, If it was, everyone would be successful,
Yeah, I think the fact that the road to happiness is never easy. And that's the thing a lot of us don't want to accept. I mean, if you want to get to where you want to go, you got to put in the work.
You do. You absolutely do. I mean, if you don't do the work, you're not going to get anywhere. And I feel like that's almost a platitude, right? But to use an example, right? So when I was at the startup, it was called Pure Bang Games, and I didn't know anything about games, right? I mean, I was literally just showing up to work and going, like, I think there was like a good solid month, but I was just there, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do, right? And when I was asked to do something, it was stuff that I'd never done before, and I had to just, cross my fingers and hope that what I did was the right thing to do. And I remember just being paralyzed by fear. And one day I was like, you know what? I've been staring at this document for like 2 days, and I'm wasting my time, and I'm wasting precious time for the startup and for the people in the room. So all I can do now is do my best and take a stab at it. Just any stab, right? Doesn't even matter if it's wrong. Just make a decision, And I remember I made a decision on the document, and I shared it, and I immediately got feedback from people, and then changed the document again, and realized at the time, like, wow, like, I have to not be afraid to fail. Like, I have to be vulnerable enough to be okay to fail in front of people, and to be humble enough to take their feedback and say, yes, you're right, let me go fix that.
And if you hadn't, you would have been still staring at that document.
Yeah, I wouldn't have grown. So yeah, those first couple years were really tough. Like, I mean, we were like really surviving by the skin of our teeth. And it wasn't until I think the third year or so that Riot Games actually contacted us to work with them on like some smaller games. And I worked on one of the smaller games. I'm sorry to be so vague. Like, I can't really talk about which games they were.
I think we're happy to hear whatever you can share. So go for it.
And then after that, like 6 months or maybe like a year passed by, and we had to pitch another game. And then we flew out to Riot. I met their CEO and we pitched the game to the CEO and to a bunch of the people, senior people, and started working on a bigger like sort of mobile game. I can talk about which game that was. Blitzcrank's Poor Roundup, and that was the first time that I actually started working and talking to people from Riot and just being like super impressed. Right, I was like, wow, these guys are super smart, you know. I made a promise to myself that like with this game I was going to do the best, right? Like I was going to do the best. And the game was a struggle too, right? Because, you know, you're talking about two separate development teams in different parts of the country. You know, we're trying to do this at like a fast speed with like as little resources as possible. But I think we really put everything we had into that. And so when they came to visit, when those guys from Riot came to visit Baltimore, and I got to meet them and talk to them, when I finally left Pure Bang, when Anne was pregnant, they actually contacted me and told me like, hey, like we love the work that you do, you know, like, and we really think you could do well here at Riot. We think you're a Rioter. Do you want to apply? You know, and you know, from the point of applying to like getting there, that's a whole nother ordeal. But I had to really like struggle for 4 years to be good enough for someone from that standpoint to accept me as a potential peer, right?
I mean, that's the big thing, because, you know, even just being considered for application is one thing.
Yeah. And so, you know, I was pretty much self-taught at that point, and so that was really amazing validation, and I felt very honored and touched and also scared. And, you know, I had to be prepared for that opportunity, right? Like, if I hadn't done a good job, if I had just, like, phoned in that game, they would have never asked me to join, right?
You wouldn't have been on the radar.
Yeah. If I hadn't, you know, worked hard during those 4 years, like, I wouldn't have been prepared to lead that project, right? If I hadn't failed a bunch of times leading up to that project, like, I would have not done as good of a job, right? So I was prepared to take that opportunity, right? And that's how I got to Riot, right? Luck and circumstance played a huge part, but I was able to take advantage of that opportunity when it came, and that's all that matters.
And, you know, if you hadn't, you're exactly right. They wouldn't have given you a second thought if you had phoned it in.
Yeah, they would have been like, yeah, this guy sucks, you know?
And you're kind of known at that point, right? I mean, the thing is that all of your experience, people are always watching. They're always kind of paying attention to what's going on. And the fact that it worked out for you is a testament to your work, your hard work and dedication.
Well, I mean, it's not my hard work, it's the team's work, right?
Fair enough.
I mean, yes, I played a part in it, but if it wasn't for the team and the people that we work with, it wouldn't have been at that quality, you know? Which is not to discount my contribution either, but it's such a team-based thing, right?
Well, yeah, video games is definitely not a one-person thing.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, it's definitely a team aspect, just from what I know about it.
Yeah, and, you know, I think at the end of the day, though, like, my job was to push the team to hit a certain quality bar. So I am proud of that fact, you know? Like, oh, okay, like, I think I'd like to think that maybe I did push people to, like, reach a level that they weren't able to reach before. And to have everybody improve as part of that process. I'd like to think that. And that's something I'm very proud of. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, that you got to take advantage of those opportunities.
So what does life, where do you see yourself going at this point? You think you're going to stay in this industry?
Yeah, I think so. You know, what's interesting is life always throws a curveball, which is another platitude. But, you know, when I joined Riot, I was really uncertain in terms of what was going to happen because I was so used to making games. The position that I entered in was not involved in making games at all, right? Mm-hmm. I joined a publishing team, which was basically a marketing team, right? And I joined a department at Riot that focuses on like that doesn't work on the game itself, League of Legends, but on like other parts surrounding League of Legends, like all the creative stuff, right? Like comic books and things like that. And so I was really hesitant at first because I was like, man, I think I really just love making games. Do I want to, you know, do I want to be in a position where I'm not making games or not doing something creative,
right,
but I'm managing a group of people? Is that something that I want to do? And you know, I just decided to take a chance. I was like, I would be crazy to say no to this, you know, opportunity. And so when I arrived and went to work on my first day, and we had to go through a seminar too. And when I went to work the first day, I was like, it was like just like being back on the first day of Pure Bang Games, right? I was just like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing, you know?
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know, but I guess they hired me to figure it out, you know? And learn through that process that actually it's not so much, solving problems isn't so much about you trying to come up with the solution, but it's about talking to the people who are dealing with the problem and asking them questions and listening to their needs, you know? And then finding solutions based on their needs instead of like imposing your own will, which actually isn't too far from the creative process, right? When you write something like, for example, like when I write a poem, when I write a piece of work, or think about a game mechanic, the way creativity works is, you know, somehow, somewhere, like an idea comes to you, and you start working on that idea, and eventually that idea takes on a life of its own, and it no longer becomes about what you want it to be, but it becomes about what it needs to be, right? And so you're serving that voice and that idea. So really, you know, great creativity is about selflessness. It's about it's about service. It's about serving the idea and taking the ego out of the equation. And so that was a commonality in my position of like listening to people, you know, and trying to find solutions based on what I'm hearing. And the thing that really surprised me was how much I loved the work. And I loved the work because the work was challenging. You know, it was challenging me and forcing me to grow. But then I also loved the people that I work with. And that's like the best part of my job. I just love working with those people. And so I was actually surprised at how much a job that I thought I had doubts about enjoying because it wasn't what I was used to doing was something that I could really enjoy depending on the circumstance.
So you went outside your comfort zone. You took this job.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily something you were prepared for, and it's turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing. You know, I think now, I mean, I'm still with that team, but I'm also now kind of stretching out and working with story teams as well, you know, story exploration teams, which is something that I've always wanted to do as well, right? Like I fell into that, again, through luck and circumstance, right? Because those teams needed help, and I just happened to be there, but I was also prepared to take that opportunity and do a good job, right?
Yeah.
And so now I work with like some really interesting like storytellers and people that I've like worshipped over the years, and I'm like, oh, I can't believe that I'm here and doing this, right? And potentially like also working as a product owner in that space, not just a manager of a process, right? Or as a leader of a process. So that's been really humbling to me. And again, I feel very lucky because after I joined here, again, stumbled onto an opportunity that I really, really enjoy. I think the thing that people always focus on is like how competent they are at something, you know, like, oh, I'm really good at doing X, Y, and Z, right?
Right. Yeah.
And actually I found that it doesn't actually matter that much. I think what actually matters in a creative field when you're working with other people is trust. People actually want to be able to. People want to know if they can trust your taste, and if they can trust you as a collaborator. And until you have that trust, they don't care if you're capable of doing something, right? Like your competency isn't really an issue. I found that to be really interesting, that it's all about trust first. And after you build trust, then it's about the competency that you have. And then you can also cash in on that trust to do certain things that, you may not have been able to do before.
It's a powerful thing.
Yeah. I feel like I just rambled.
No, you totally did not. Listen, I am so happy you were able to do this, and we've been going back and forth trying to make this work. And I'm glad we were able to finally get together. And I hate to stop, because you've been dropping nuggets of knowledge all throughout, and so I'd hate to stop the roll we're on. But we have to do your corner. What is one thing? And again, you've been dropping knowledge like crazy, so let's try to avoid advice if you can, but otherwise, what's one piece of advice, resource, reference, a person to look into that you would kind of recommend to someone who's chasing their dream?
Wow. Okay, so I'm trying to think of something people can reference and can actually read. Actually, one book that I recently came across, somebody told me about that that I checked out, is called "Say Anything," and the book is about leadership, and it talks about how good leadership is about creating a safe space where people can say anything, and being vulnerable enough of a leader, where people are going to tell you anything that's on their mind, right? I bring that up because ultimately, when you want to pursue the things that you love, you're going to find yourself in a leadership position, because if you're the type of person that goes after something that they want and isn't willing to take no for an answer, I think you're a leader, and you have the initiative to get people pumped up and to get yourself pumped up over the thing that you feel passionate about. And in that process, you're going to be leading people, whether you like it or not. And I think in order to be really successful at what you do, you really have to have a good group of people around you who are smart and are willing to say what's on their mind, even when it's contrary to what's being presented in the situation, right? And there's a lot of studies out there of how people feel pressured when they're the only ones saying no or yes to certain situations. So it's really your job to be a leader who's vulnerable, who's willing to admit something that they don't know, who's willing to say to people, hey, you can tell me anything, right? So, of creating that environment so great things can happen with that level of communication. That's why I would suggest that book. I know I'm probably leaving some really great books out too. But that's one I would recommend. And then I think as a piece of advice, excuse me, and as a piece of advice, I guess that I haven't mentioned yet is when you go and do something, always ask yourself why. I think in life we sometimes go off and just do something because we feel really driven creatively to do it. And I think, especially if you're a creative person, yeah, you should definitely pursue that impulse. But definitely ask yourself why you're doing things in a certain way at any given point. And question everything that you do and the decisions that you make. Be really, really hard on yourself. Don't let anything kind of pass by because you're tired or whatever. Be very vigilant. And as part of that process of being vigilant, be vulnerable and don't be afraid to fail. I think it's better to make a decision quickly instead of sitting there for days and hours figuring out what decision to make. Just make a decision, stick to it, fail quickly, get advice from people, get feedback from people, take that feedback, iterate quickly, and just rinse and repeat, because doing that will get you to where you want to go faster than trying to be perfect or trying to find the perfect solution, because it doesn't exist. The perfect solution doesn't exist. Everybody gets there by going through many, many cycles over and over again, by failing over and over again very, very quickly.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, guys, don't worry. Everything will be in the show notes. You should definitely check it out. If you missed any of these words of wisdom, they will be there. Yuzun, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story, because I think it's a very inspiring one, and one that, guys, if you have a creative desire, pursue it. Look at what he's done. It's amazing. By the way, like I said, you don't have to wait for anybody. Like, look at, I would say, if you follow film and you know who the Duplass brothers are, those guys are a great example of like their $3,000 film school and how they made films on nothing. With all the resources that are out there, anybody can do anything. There is nothing stopping anyone from doing anything except for themselves and their commitment level. That's it. It's really simple. I got nothing else to say. Thank you. Awesome. Dude, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for listening to me rant for an hour and 16 minutes. This was very interesting. Guys, I could not stop smiling all through the episode. Yuzun was dropping words of wisdom left and right. Knowledge bombs just going off all throughout the episode. If you missed any of that or any of the links he shared, be sure to check out the show notes page over at chasingdreamshq.com/episode 27. That's episode 27. Until next time, guys, start implementing those words of wisdom and keep chasing.
Thank you so much for listening to Chasing Dreams. Aimee would love to connect with you and hear all about your pursuit of chasing your dreams. Connect with her on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram via @ChasingDreamsHQ. Or you can find Aimee on Twitter @AimeeJ21. That's AIMEEJ21. Be sure to visit headquarters over at ChasingDreamsHQ.com for more inspiration, motivation, and resources to help with your own dream chase. We hope you'll join Aimee next week, and until then, keep chasing.